Welcome back to Breaking Silence here on Asia One. I'm Craig Vermey. For years, climate change was often described as a future threat, a problem for the distant generations, a crisis facing small island nations, developing countries and vulnerable communities far from the centres of global power. That argument is becoming harder and harder to make. This summer, hundreds of people are estimated to be dying during heat waves in the United Kingdom. Not a distant desert, not a struggling nation lacking resources, but in one of the world's wealthiest countries. Streets, homes, hospitals and communities across Britain are feeling the impact of temperatures that scientists say would have once seemed extraordinary. The reality is stark. Climate change is no longer knocking at the door. It is already inside the house. For many families, these deaths are not dramatic events captured on television. Heat is often a silent killer, an elderly parent whose heart cannot cope with the temperature, a vulnerable neighbour struggling to breathe, a patient whose existing illness is pushed beyond its limits. The tragedy unfolds quietly, often behind closed doors, one life at a time. What makes this crisis particularly alarming is that Britain is not traditionally a country built for extreme heat. Homes were designed to keep warm in, not heat out. Infrastructure was built for a climate that no longer exists. Communities are being forced to adapt to conditions that are arriving faster than many expected. And yet this story is about much more than Britain. For decades, countries in Africa, Asia, the Pacific and Latin America have warned about the dangers of climate change. They have watched crops fail, coastlines disappear, floods intensify and temperatures climb. Many contributed only a small fraction of emissions driving global warming, yet they found themselves at the front lines of the crisis. Now the impacts are increasingly reaching some of the wealthiest countries on Earth. Heat waves are overwhelming parts of Europe. Wildfires are becoming more destructive. Infrastructure is buckling under temperatures it was never designed to endure. The idea that wealth alone can shield nations from climate change is beginning to crumble. Perhaps that is the uncomfortable lesson emerging from this summer. Climate change does not recognise borders, passports or income levels. It does not care whether a country is rich or poor. It does not distinguish between global north and global south. The people suffering most are often those least able to protect themselves. Older people, young children, those lying alone, those with existing health conditions, and those without access to cooling, healthcare or support networks. The climate crisis is not simply an environmental issue. It is a human issue, a health issue, a justice issue, because every life lost in a heat wave is a reminder that behind the scientific data are human beings, families, communities, futures that should have stretched much further. The world spent years debating whether climate change would affect everyone. The answer is becoming painfully clear. It already does. And unless more is done, the cost will continue to be measured not only in degrees and statistics, but in lives. Recent studies suggest that thousands of excess deaths may already be linked to heat waves across England and Wales this year, with some analyses indicating that hundreds of people died during the peak days of extreme temperatures. Scientists say many of these deaths would likely not have occurred without the additional warming caused by human activity. The United Kingdom is far from alone. Across Europe, heat waves have contributed to thousands of additional deaths, placing enormous pressure
on healthcare systems and exposing weaknesses in infrastructure designed for a cooler climate. Researchers increasingly warn that these events are no longer exceptional. They are becoming part of a new normal. For years, climate discussions often focused on future generations. Today, the consequences are unfolding in real time. Heat is now one of the deadliest weather-related threats in the world. It increases the risk of heart attacks, strokes, respiratory illnesses, and other serious health complications, particularly among vulnerable populations. There is also a growing moral dimension to the debate. Developing countries have long argued that they are suffering disproportionate consequences from emissions produced largely by wealthier nations. Now, as climate impacts intensify across Europe and North America, some hope the crisis will finally generate the urgency required for meaningful global action. Because climate change is not simply about protecting one country or one region. It is about recognizing that humanity shares the same atmosphere, the same planet, and ultimately the same future.
The coming years may determine whether the world adapts fast enough to a rapidly changing climate. Governments will face growing pressure to reduce emissions, strengthen infrastructure, and protect vulnerable communities from extreme heat. But adaptation alone will not solve the problem. Scientists continue to warn, without deeper global action, heat waves will become more frequent, more intense, and more deadly. The lesson from this summer is simple. Climate change is no longer a distant warning. It is a present reality. And the decisions made today will determine how many lives are lost tomorrow. There are moments when history does not feel distant. It does not sit quietly inside museums or gather dust in old books. Instead, it reaches across thousands of years and reminds us that the people who came before us were not so different after all.